Right, so the task today is to make a mask, and the mask must represent how we feel, in other words how I feel. And a mask is a great thing, mainly because it's something that you can use to hide behind, or it's something that you can use to further express yourself. And in this case, what you're going to do is make a symbolical mask in low relief. In other words, it's going to have a very low depth. It's not going to be totally three-dimensional, and it's going to express just how we feel. So what I've done is I've created a whole lot of plans. This is my final plan. I created about 12 before I was happy. I went out and I found this lid. It's a plastic lid, and I quite enjoy the mechanical imprint around the edge as a decorative element, because it's important that a mask has decorative elements to them as well. And then I'm going to use the leftover plastic sheeting from the shadow art project and work from there. Right, now one of the most common things about masks is that they can be quite geometrical, so I'm just going to give myself some guidelines as I did in my planning, and I'm basically going to say this sort of: here's my eyes, here's my mouth, and here's my forehead, and I'll sort of work with that as a start, and we'll see how we go from there. I've got myself a glue gun, which I'm going to use to glue the various aspects. I've got myself a pair of scissors just to cut and shape the different objects. So the first thing is, I know I want a mouth, so I'm going to start by cutting a square, and then slowly rounding off the square, since I want a circular mouth to echo the circle, or sort of circular marks. I could draw using a compass or some round object. I could draw a circle and cut it out, but I'm going to allow my circle to be a little bit more handmade and not exactly perfect. So I'm just doing it freehand. And then we sort of have a circle. It's too big at the moment, so we can just keep drawing it down, cutting it down. And these little offcuts that I'm making, I could use those as well if I want. Now that's about a good size. I've got this nice offcut that I can think about. In my drawing, I've left a hole in the middle of the circle, but I'm going to build that hole upwards instead of downwards. Okay, and we're just waiting for the glue gun to start getting some heat. Still going to take a little bit of time, so I'll put that there. And then in my planning, I've got eyes. The eyes are not too large, they're quite small, so I'm going to use a small piece. And once again, I'm just going to cut a square. This time I might want the two eyes to be the same sort of shape, even if they're not a perfect circle. So you could get quite scientific about it and make everything perfect. It'll also add to the more mechanical kind of finish rather than a hand finish, which is also a great idea. These things are giving me a little bit of problems with the double cut, so I've just switched around to another pair of sharper scissors. I just hope this glue gun is going to get hot, so I hope it's working. At the moment there's nothing happening there. Okay, so I've cut myself two eyes, roughly the same shape, and I can place my eyes into my design. I've also planned some sort of shapes that fall out of the eyes, two sort of elongated shapes. These are decorative elements, symbolical of tears maybe. Since my design, I'm going to be crying. And at the same time, I'm going to use this piece to cut out a nose. And as Picasso said, and Picasso spent a long time studying art from Africa, particularly masks, from the Dogon culture, and what he finally came to the conclusion, which influenced the whole of Western art and still does today, is that the photographic way of representing objects is not always the best way. In actual fact, a better way is through what's called a conceptualization of the object, and that's exactly what these Dogon masks were doing. They were conceptualizing faces to get the most expression out of what they were trying to achieve, which is really great. Okay, so while I'm waiting for this glue gun, I'm cutting more pieces, I'm modifying my design as I go along, thinking, do I want it actually to look exactly like my planning, or can I grow my planning to something much better, or better being more interesting and more suited to what I want to do. And here comes my glue gun. And once again, be a little bit gentle with the glue gun, be careful, don't worry about its extra pieces going all over the place, but it can burn you, and it does give a nasty burn if you get it on your skin. Best thing is if you do get any of the plastic onto your skin, the best thing then is to stick it straight into cold water, so it might be a good idea to have some cold water nearby if that does happen. Right, so I don't need too much. I just put on my pieces, enough to stick on my pieces, and you can see how quickly it goes once you start building. Straighten my pieces. The glue gun takes quite a few minutes to dry, and I can decide exactly where I want it. Right, now, at the moment everything's looking a little bit confusing. Standard, I had some nice V's cut in my design, I planned, so I'm just going to keep those V's, because any geometric shapes, they do become very interesting. And here I'm just going to go straight onto my object. I'm going to place them this time, and I'm going to now improvise. So instead of following my original design of 2 V's, I'm going to use a large V and a small V there. And once again, as I said, geometry, to make the whole thing geometrical is quite a good idea, because many of the traditional masks throughout history have been quite geometrical, as the face was interpreted as, or seen as, being perfectly geometrical. And although it may not be, and definitely isn't, it's still very nice in a mask, and that's what makes the mask come alive. And that little piece fits there quite nicely, and you can see now we're slowly building it up. I'm now thinking about the inside of the mouth. So I might want that, instead of having cut a negative hole into the mouth, I'm going to make my mouth come in the opposite direction. It's going to stick out at you. So instead of being a hole, it's going to be a hole that actually advances. So that's something that can work quite well as well, and give you that sense of 3D. Okay, and then my eyes, I might want to cut some pupils. So I'm going to just cut this into 2 pieces, and maybe this time, maybe not a circle, maybe a more sort of oval shape. And there we have it. You can see how fast everything sticks with the glue gun. You could use any glue, could use cardboard, you could use wood to make the mask, you could combine different materials. That is also another way of introducing organic materials into it. So you could use grasses, or you could go totally comment against what's happening in the world with waste and recycling. And so you could see this as a recycle project, like what I'm seeing now. in my work here, in that I'm recycling all these plastics and trying to make something, a mask out of that. Right, and then we have my sort of basic mask. I think I need some eyebrows, so I'm just going to quickly cut some eyebrows and put them in. So everything is simplified, geometricized, and made in symmetry. And it doesn't have to be a perfect symmetry. If you don't want, it can also be a slightly, off-centered symmetry, which is also quite nice. So, like, my symmetry is not perfect. So what I've got here is an off-centered, everything slightly off, just as a real face is. Nobody's face is perfectly symmetrical, and to prove that, what you could do is take a photo of your face, and in some software program like GIMP, you could cut your face exactly in half, mirror it, and flip the one side over, and you'll see your face will look very different to what you experience as seen. Okay, and then we have my basic mask. Now the problem with it is that there's no unity, in that the mask, you can't see any unity in the image. So you can't really see it as a clear mask, and that's because there's different colors, etc. So now what I'm going to do is bring out the different elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use spray paint, and gold is traditionally something that is valued in society and just about all cultures, and so I'm going to make my mask gold, and now you'll start to see the mask coming out because I'm getting rid of the distracting colors. But you could also make your mask very colorful as well, and different colors for different sizes. This is just a very simple way of getting your mask to unify and to have a look. And after I've done that, so there we have our gold mask. I just need to let that dry for a short period. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just I've allowed the spray paint to dry a bit, and I'm just going to take a bit of paint and maybe just highlight a few areas just to bring out the 3D quality. Otherwise one's got to rely on the light that one has seen. And I'm just using acrylic, but it could be, since I sprayed it with an oil-based paint, it should be an oil-based paint that I'm using here, if I would like this work to be very permanent. So I'm just making the bottom layer, the original layer of the lid, a bit darker, and the highest layer of the eyes, just so that it looks more like an eyeball. And in that way, usually in art, what's further away is darker, and what's closer is lighter. But what I'm doing now with the paint here is just reversing that, and so it's a very simple process. So on the one level, which is this lid level, I'm true to that theory, and that I'm making it darker at the back, and bright in the front. But when it comes to the pupil, I've actually made it reverse the rule, and this is where it gets really clever, in that I've now made something that is actually very close darker. And so now your brain reads everything on different levels, and it becomes really exciting for your brain and for one that's interpreting what one's seen. So now I have these pupils that are now closest actually darkest, and yet this, they give it's a conceptual, which means it's not a realistic rendition, but rather the idea of what one sees or understands in one's mind, in a way that a architect or engineer would interpret the world, through symbols and signs. Guess where else I'm going to make it darker? In the other most forward pronounced area, which is meant to be the hole in the mouth. So this area advances as much as the pupils, and now the illusion is that it's actually further away. And now you can see how the mask is taken on a different effect. Right, and so you can see how it's taken on different effect, and now we have a much more sort of conceptual way of interpreting a face, and that the dark areas aren't always further back. The dark areas are sometimes actually closer. The light areas are sometimes further back than what they should be, and so you get all these different layers, which creates an interesting mask. And here I am in my mask, and I'm like surprised. I'm like, oh, thank you. Right, and so here you can see the mask now, and you can see how it's got 3 dimensions, and how I've played with the different layers. And that's far more challenging for an artist and more intellectual than just copying a face like a photograph. It's far more meaningful, and artists like Picasso discovered this, as I mentioned earlier, and it was something that now has influenced the whole of Western art and actual art throughout the world. At the moment, that people aren't so interested in making photographs, but rather trying to make something which is more challenging or conceptually aware. And so what they're making is conceptual art. Okay, thank you.